everybody. My name is Jimmy Don Kerr, and this is the SmallTown Collectibles YouTube channel. My guest today is a gentleman that I have gotten to know through the various live streams that we have with the different members of this community. I've never actually met this person. Maybe I've been on a live stream where he's been there, but I really just kind of noticed him because he is a talented artist. You may have seen some of his work, like Something is Killing the Turtles. That gained national attention when it was spotlighted on the Comic Tom YouTube channel. You'll also see his work on various covers over on his Instagram. He's done logos for various members in our community. Everybody join me in welcoming to 10 Questions, the one, the only, and the talented artist, Austin Lemme.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on 10 Questions.
Oh, man, I appreciate that. I've been wanting to get you on here for a while. You know how it is. It's the art community, or at least the art part of this thing that we're all involved in, comic books, is a great interest to me. And the talent that you guys have, that, you in particular have, just astonishes me. Like, it's just amazing to me because it's not something that I could ever do. So I'm really excited to talk with you. I think I've got some good questions. But before we start the official 10 questions, did I say your name correctly? Austin Lemme.
That is correct, yeah.
Look at that. The Hillbilly said something right for a change, and it was a name, people. I struggle, Austin. I do this like the first appearances and key issues video, and you've got these different artists, and they've got these different, and I can't say them. Like, I struggle constantly. So first question, Austin, is the same for everybody that comes on 10 Questions, and that is, what or who got you into comics?
So it's always been, I've always had the interest, being young with even toys and going back to things like that. And I always had a fascination with Spider-Man, as all kids do, I imagine. But one day, I was with my cousin, and we went to an actual comic book store, and I picked up a Spider-Man comic book, an old What If issue. I didn't know any better. I thought that was just a regular Spider-Man comic book. And I've been into it ever since. There's been a couple dry spells over the years where I stopped collecting, but I always stayed on top of everything as, the best of my ability. But so I've been going at it since about 88, 89.
So, you pick up that first book. What was it about that first Spider-Man book that really kind of drew your attention? Was it the art? Was it the story? Like, what was it about that first book that really drew you in?
Just that it was Spider-Man. Well, no, actually, that's not true. It was Spider-Man, but this was the What If issue where what if the alien costume had taken over Spider-Man, right?
Yeah.
So it was Spider-Man in this really cool black costume. Right. So that's what made me gravitate towards it. Not only that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the cover, but it's also got a bright pink background.
Yeah.
And, the late 80s, those neon colors, the pinks, the greens, the oranges, those were the colors that, gravitated towards, pop culture and fashion back then. So, yeah, I was really into it. Loved the idea of a black suit Spider-Man.
Cool. So, like, when you pick that book up, you start to read it, you read through it, and then there was something about that book that made you pick up the next one. Like, what was it about that book in particular? Was it the art, like the colors that popped? You're like, dude, this is cool. I wanted to see what else this is all about.
Yeah, it was just, I want to know more about Spider-Man in general, and become more familiar with the character overall. And at this point, it wasn't even necessarily about the villains and things like that. I didn't know anything about who's Hobgoblin and all of that, right? It was just, I knew Spider-Man and I wanted to know more about Spider-Man, and, everything just kind of grew from there.
Cool. Like, who was like the second hero that you found? Like, I love Spider-Man too. For me, and I always tell everybody, that's why I'm such a DC fan, is because I had 5 channels and Justice League came on one of them, or Super Friends is what it was called. Super Friends came on one. So I immediately gravitated to Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, all those guys. But I also knew Spidey. Is there another character that you kind of gravitated towards as your love of the books kind of grew?
Oddly enough, no. I was gung-ho Spider-Man. Nothing too crazy. Obviously, keys weren't even in my vocabulary. So I was just picking up random books. If Spider-Man was in it, I was into it. It was also a weird time in comic books too, especially with my age at the time, because Todd McFarlane, in the early 90s, he was on Spider-Man, and then he created this character called Spawn. And I was, at that weird pre-teenage kind of years there, and I liked the idea of something being dark.
Yeah.
And I really went into that pigeonhole of, what can we find out if everything just went dark, more evil and things like that, not your typical superhero, the nice guy always wins and stuff like that. So that opened my eyes to a completely different type of storyline, a completely different type of character design. Obviously, they, when they created Image, they were doing a lot with colors. So the artwork was much better, more detail. So I got into the whole Spawn thing and I never left.
Cool, man. That's awesome. Cool. So, question two, and I see you've got some slabs back there. I see some Star Wars. I see, some different things behind you there. The Adak Walker's awesome. I actually have one of those too, the one that I had when I was a kid that I'm actually rebuilding right now to display, kind of similar to what you have there. But when it comes to comic books, do you consider yourself a reader of comic books or are you a collector?
Ooh, I am a reader of certain titles, very, very minimal, mostly indies nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
But I would consider myself a collector more so than a reader.
Gotcha. Because everybody collects different ways, right? Some people like to do slabs. Some people don't want to slab anything. They want it all to be raw so that they can get to the book, if they want to read it again.
Mhm.
Like what stories, or you said indies, and that's something I think is an interesting question in that, and I've asked it on here before, is what is it about indies that's drawing you there?
I like the freedom of the storylines. I like that they're not necessarily pigeonholed into canon. Anything goes, anything can happen. One thing that I've really been enjoying too, a lot of the modern horror comic books, that something is killing the children and basket full of heads and things like that. But they do short runs, right? So I can get an entire story out of, 6 to 10 issues, and that's fantastic, right? And then I can just move on to something else. One thing I don't really like about, the big two, if you will, is if I don't want to be limited to still purchase the book, even though I don't like where the storyline is going. With a lot of the indie titles, I don't really have to worry about that, So it's the freedom of enjoying, the written work as well as the artwork, but I get the chance to kind of jump around and not feel like I'm neglecting a storyline now just because I don't like it. And what if something happens in there? Well, now that's a key I missed out on, So I don't want to feel like I have to get every single issue of a title. Other than Spawn, I'll jump in and out of the big two all day. Yeah, I definitely enjoy the freedoms of, exploring not only new artists, but new writers, different storylines and things like that.
I think it's interesting, and I like that answer because and specifically right now because you said you were a Spider-Man fan, and you had this Nick Spencer run that a lot of people really didn't enjoy. Now I read every issue of it. I'm not going to tell you that I bought every issue of it, but I did read every issue of it, and it was okay. It just kind of drug along. But I feel what you're saying because, like, I'm a Superman guy, right? And sometimes Superman can be boring. Everybody that's watching this is like, "Oh, I told you, Jimmy." Not, but it's true, and I think that's true for pretty much any character. That there are times when the storylines just aren't as good as others. And I like that what you said about indies is because it does put in really a short. It's not that big of a commitment. You can read 6 books and then move to something else that is completely different than what you just read. And so I really like that. I like that answer.
Yeah, if all of these different titles that I enjoyed, if they were all ongoing series, either I wouldn't know what's going on anymore, or I'd be broke because I would have to buy every issue of, countless titles every month. And that's just not in the cards to do. one thing that I am a supporter of too is reading digitally. So I've got titles that I enjoy, and they're all digital. I don't own a single floppy of those titles, and I like that. But the collector side of me, some titles have to be, I have to have the floppy, you know?
Sure.
So that's, I think my reading habits and my collecting habits are completely different, you
Completely
know,
different. Yeah.
and separate. So I support, I know that digital comics is kind of frowned upon in some eyes. Some people support it. It's this or that, but I see benefits in both, and I enjoy both.
Cool, man. So let's jump over. I want to talk about your art. And so, question three is like, at what age did you actually start like drawing?
I've always been kind of a doodler, right? Since I was a kid. I would say right around the early 90s or so is when I actually started to draw from an idea, right? So it's not a doodle anymore. I want to draw this, and start to kind of take it seriously and learn. So it's been a while.
About how old were you, like in the 90s? About how old were you?
Oh, geez, now I'm doing math. I was 14, 15.
Yeah. So this is something that I like to ask, especially people that are artistic, because I can draw if I'm looking at something.
Mhm.
Like I can look at something and I can draw it, but I cannot take an idea that I have in my head. Like I'll think of something, and I've tried to do it where I have an idea and I'll try to put it on. I can't do it. Like that connection is that. How does that work for you? So you can take the idea in your mind and then put it on a piece of paper.
So it wasn't always that way. When I started to actually try to learn how to draw, especially comic book characters, because I started drawing. I did a lot of graffiti when I was young,
Hmm.
so a lot of that colorful type of artwork style. But when I got into like comic book characters, I would do the same thing. I would copy it, right? So I enjoyed an image that, if it was a Spider-Man cover or whatever, and I would reference it and I would start to draw that. As my lines got tighter and I actually started drawing good or well, if you will, I noticed that I was still always drawing somebody else's artwork. It wasn't my own. So probably late 90s or so is when I started to, okay, I'm not going to draw this anymore. I'm not going to copy this. I'm going to try to draw something out of my head. And I started to develop my own kind of style, which is it's good, to do that and be able to do it. Now, I would say just like any other artist, I probably don't like 80% of the stuff that I produce. Um, but you're your own worst critic, as they say. But yeah, so that's how I kind of evolved from copying to going my own route. But with that being said, too, I still do reference a lot in regards to like how I'm going to pose a character. Um, but I can look at, uh, I would look at like let's say Spider-Man, a Spider-Man pose, and just utilize that skeletal framework or position that he's in, and I can turn that into the Hulk, right?
Wow.
So I still do reference poses and things like that and stances, and is he going to be standing here with the gauntlet like this, or is this hero reaching for swords and things like that? I still do a lot of referencing that way. Um, when I try to come up with my own poses, my mind still kind of goes back to positions and poses that I've already seen before anyway. I mean, there are only so many different ways that a body can move, right?
Right.
But if I'm standing here like this and I just turn it a little bit, it changes the dynamic of the artwork completely, right? So it's just identifying, the perspective and shapes and different poses and what is the character doing in the artwork. So I still do a lot of referencing that way, but regardless, I have a good time doing it.
Cool, man. So this is, and what you're kind of talking about goes into question three. And so I'll start it like this. How much time do you spend today practicing practicing your craft, because I mean, I think with anything, whether you're an athlete or you're a mortgage banker like I am, you have to practice your crafts. You have to get better and learn and study your craft. How much time do you spend really just working on what you're doing?
Well, there's kind of different things between practicing. I'll split it up this way for you.
Okay.
Right. So I'm on, Zoom calls and meetings and things like that. And I think you'll even notice, like, sometimes when we're in the chat, I'm always doodling something. And that's really my practice. I'm not drawing anything in particular, but what I'll do is, create straight lines, and I'll take different pens and just start to ink those lines just to see how those pens behave. I'll take markers and just start wiping over different pens just to see if it smears, how it behaves. Does the marker bleed? I've got countless of different artboards and stuff all over the floor back here, and there's nothing on them except for just big scribbles. Let me see if I have one over here. And it's just, like, for instance, here, I was just playing around with a different paintbrush. If I wanted to do like a dark background or something like that, just to do this little spot with a thin pen would take forever, right?
Yeah.
So I was playing around with actual painting the ink, taking colors and different shades of red and just trying to see how it sits with a dark line and things like that. Should I ink with a color or go into blacks? So I still do that quite often, all day, every day. Actually drawing something, I like to do something at least once a week, on the weekend. I have a lot of blank covers. I've got ideas for almost all of them. So depending on my mood, I'll just grab one of those, or I'll do, one of these, do a lot of artwork on just the backing boards for comics, which is my favorite thing to draw.
All right, you've got my mind going in 1,000 directions. All right, so like when I asked that question, I wasn't necessarily like, you've blown my mind, right? So I wasn't necessarily thinking about you sitting there doodling like that, taking colors or a pen with a line and a marker, and really, I guess I should have known that, but how much thought really goes into that when you're almost trying to figure out what does what, so that when it comes time to do a piece, you know how the different things are going to react once you get them on the page. That's insanely interesting. Like in my mind, I was thinking, like, do you sit around and draw hands, or do you do like, Hulk's hands or Spider-Man's hands or like Spider-Man's face? Do you ever just sit around and like draw those kind of things?
What I really like to do a lot of practice on is eyes. I always start with the eyes. And if you go back and look at some of my artwork, you'll notice that a lot of my characters, there's no pupil in their eyes. I like to keep their eyes just white. But every time I practice and I draw and I'm just doodling, nothing serious, it's eyes. And I do the pupils, and there's different styles, So I started drawing a lot of eyes, mimicking like anime. Right? Real big eyes, heavy eyelashes, eyebrows to show emotion, and then the big reflection inside the pupils and stuff like that. So I really study that. In regards to like hands and stuff like that, I do draw, but I don't sit down and, say, today I'm going to start drawing hands or feet, or things like that. I don't really do that. A lot of times when I sit down, I just start and the pen kind of drives what I'm going to end up with.
Interesting. So none of these questions are in any kind of order because I got all these things popping in my mind. Like when you sit down to do a cover, like you said, you got those blank covers back there. Do you like draw it first on something else before you actually start on the cover itself? Like I would think that once you get it on the cover, like if you screw up pretty bad, that's, kind of done. Or are you able to kind of cover those things up if you do make a mistake?
Well, I always do a little thumbnail, right? Because I want to make sure I position everything properly on the cover, depending on the cover that I'm doing. I would hate to start with like, a really cool face and end up cutting off the whole shoulder because I ran out of space, right?
Right.
Or something like that. So I try to get all of my positioning done, and I start everything in pencil. So once I get all of the basic shapes, and there's typically zero detail with my pencils. Once I get all of the shapes kind of positioned and all of the real estate covered that I really want to do, then I go into the inks, and that's when all of the real detail comes into play. The good thing about making mistakes and things like that, some of them I can turn into happy accidents and rework it and figure it out. But with things now like, you could use whiteout for inks and things like that. It doesn't really take away from the artwork. If you notice, like on a lot of original artwork that even, Jim Lee and some of these excellent comic book artists, you'll see mistakes on their stuff all the time. And if you actually look at it, you'll see the different textures in the inks from where they had to white out certain areas or, go over pens, and to a certain degree, even different. You can tell when they changed pens because the depth of the blacks change and things like that. So there's a lot of different things that you can do there. And depending on what the final product is going to be, you could cover it up with color or, kind of figure it out as you go along.
Yeah, Austin, I've never noticed anything like that in my life on any cover. Like it's amazing that you can see that. Like when you get a comic book cover, and maybe it's a piece of art, maybe it's a Jim Lee piece that you just love. Do you really study it like that much to where you could see that, hey, well, they probably, something changed here and they were doing, like, can you see it that well?
Well, usually you're going to see those mistakes when you're looking at the original art, not necessarily the final
On the
product.
cover, right?
They'll do all of the touch ups and stuff while they edit and create the digital file for actual printing. But I do study. I don't study Liefeld feet, but I do study certain artists do things very well. Things like Jim Lee, it just, the dynamics of, his poses and things like that are great. But the level of detail that someone like Todd McFarlane puts into his artwork, you could see that there are just thousands and thousands of strokes that go into his pieces, and Greg Capullo and things like that. So depending on the artist, I'll take different influences. Um, how am I going to shade this? Am I going to just color in blacks and keep the shading dark? Am I going to use cross hatching and things like that? So I study different things like that. And, depending on the art piece that really influenced the lighting that I'm using or something like that, I'll take from those artists to see how I want to incorporate different pen strokes and styles.
Cool. So, and this is a question I've always wanted to ask somebody because, and you said it yourself a minute ago. I've heard a lot of different artists that I've watched on YouTube or just different places. They talk about their lines as their lines get tighter. What does that mean? Like as your lines get better or tighter, or what's the phrasing? I can't remember the phrasing exactly that you use, but
Yeah. So when my lines got tighter, so it's a couple of different things. Like in my graffiti days, I outlined everything with really thick lines. And then I learned when and when not to do that to help impact a piece. I used to just do a quick circle and, a basic shape of a head, and then I would just turn that into the head. Well, now I know different angles and how the actual human face is shaped. So it's just, tightening up that and keeping it cleaner and more precise. And I think that's really the term I'm looking for, is getting the precision on how I'm going to do certain things. When do I need extra detail? When do I need extra shading? When don't I? Because before, it was just, if this guy's suit is black, it's just black, and I would just paint it all in black. But now I know not everything needs to be that way. I could just make it look like it's black without any black being in there, right? So using that negative space to help show shadow, perspective, and things like that.
cool. No, I've always wanted to ask that question. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but I can see that though. Now that you've, have explained it, you can see that as you get better again at your craft and what you're doing, that makes total sense. All right. So I think I asked 10 questions under question 4, but we all know 10 questions is like 10 questions with 30 questions. So anyway, all right. So question 5, and you mentioned a few of these people in that last answer, but like who were, like growing up, who were your artistic influences? And not doesn't necessarily have to just be comic book people? Like, were there people outside of comic books? Like you mentioned the graffiti, where, did you have some influences, from all those different genres?
Absolutely. So when it comes to graffiti, I followed this artist called Dame, and his art style was very unique because it wasn't just letters, right? A, B, C, D, whatever, and spelling out a name. He would actually turn those letters into three-dimensional shapes, or put them into imagery. And I really liked his style. And he used very little to no color in some of these pieces. So when it comes to graffiti, at least back in the day, the lines were simple and the color made it pop. But that wasn't necessarily the case with his art style. So I really enjoyed that and followed him, and took a lot of lessons out of his artwork. But when it comes to comic books, Todd McFarlane all day. Yep. And that
Good
goes
deal.
all the way back to, his Spider-Man days, Amazing Spider-Man, into Spider-Man, and then obviously into Spawn, which is obviously, my passion now.
Who are some of the artists out there right now? Because I know I end up finding, just different artists that I enjoy, like Shannon Mayer, Perillo. Perillo, I just shot before we came on here to do this interview. I just did the first appearances and key issues video, and there's a Perillo cover. It blows my mind what that guy can do. Like, I just love it. Are there any of the current artists today that you really dig?
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool artists, but it's based on covers, I think.
Yeah.
Inhyuk Lee, that
Yeah.
guy can do no wrong in my eyes. There's a guy who's not doing a whole lot anymore. His name was Pat Lee. He was a Canadian. He did a lot of stuff with the early Transformers when it was on Dreamwave and stuff like that. I still love his stuff. I still follow him on Instagram, even though he's not doing heavy comic book stuff anymore. But I think now, with digital being such a heavy influence on comic book art nowadays, there are incredible artists just producing some stuff, and they produce it so quickly too. It's amazing. But yeah, I would say even like Joe Madureira, excellent artist, not really doing a whole lot in the comic space today. But yeah, I was going to say, with all of the variants, everybody's doing variants. There's a lot of great artists just coming out and producing some really cool stuff, even though they're not on big books.
Cool. And I want to follow up with this question. You mentioned it a couple times, and that's the digital aspect. Now, do you yourself, do you do digital art?
When I start to color pieces, I'll do it in digital. I can use markers, but I don't like them, because I don't like seeing the strokes, right? In a comic book, you don't see the strokes. You don't see, all the pen marks and things like that. And when I produce something, I like it, the final product, to look like a final product.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really like that. But yeah, I've played around with digital. The last, I did a cover that just came out recently for Delta Dogs, and that's mixed media. So I actually produced it with pencil, and then I, scanned that in, brought it into Photoshop and inked it digitally, and put all of the colors in digitally.
Cool. That's something, because there are some books I've noticed, because I'm reading a lot more digitally now, and that is as much because of space as it is anything.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some books, like I went and looked, because I can't remember, it was maybe Batman Reptilian or something like that I was reading. And the comic book itself, the art was beautiful. But when I read that digitally, it popped. I mean, like, it came through the screen and you could see all this depth, that I couldn't necessarily see when I was looking at it on paper. And do you notice that too, as far as a lot of the digital art? Or do you think, I guess what I'm asking is, as an artist, I guess it doesn't matter if you're using a marker or a pen or a paint or something digital, it's still art. But do you notice that same thing with some of the digital books and the people who do totally digital art for the comic books?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, everything is always going to, well, not always, but typically looks better in pixel form and digital form. because it's got light behind it. And you're going to notice a lot of better detail that's just not going to come out when you put ink on a piece of paper. For instance, your gradients are going to be cleaner in digital, so you're going to see a lot of detail there. Stuff can, depending on how inks bleed into the page and get absorbed by the paper, or if the cover of the book is printed on semi-gloss or not, you're going to get different details on a printed book than you will with digital. So you could read the same book on paper and read it digitally, and you could see details that you've never seen before, So yeah, I definitely think that digital carries with it a little more detail always.
Yeah, because I just noticed, and I guess that's as my eye becomes trained, to read digitally and not necessarily, on the paper medium itself, but reading things digitally. I just started to notice like all this depth to the art itself. And I'm sitting there going back through, and I'm going back and looking through the pictures. Like, wow, I never noticed that. There's just so much more to it that it really is nice. Now, I'm still old school, so I still like to hold a book in my hand. I still like to have the book in my hand. But I am starting to kind of come around to the digital age as far as reading books on my iPad, because it really does add a lot of depth to it. Yeah, no, love that. All right, so question 6. And so you had mentioned you've got all these blank covers and you've got ideas for all of them. Like, where does inspiration for you come from to think of this idea? Like, is it something you see every day, or you saw a comic book movie, or you saw something in a comic book and now you've got this idea that you want to put on paper? Where does that inspiration come from?
Yeah, depending on the book, the inspiration could come from anywhere. For instance, if I can show you. I did one recently for Primordial, right?
Oh, no, I saw it. Yeah.
If you've read Primordial, where
Mm-hmm.
at the end it's got, the monkeys are in space and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, the monkey, I could do something with Planet of the Apes. That would be really funny. And then at the back end of the pages where everything was white. And it was just like lines, and the characters, the dog and the monkeys, were kind of walking on these lines. It reminded me of, even though it was the opposite, the old episodes of Mork and Mindy.
Mork and Mindy, yeah.
At the end, when he called Orson, even though he was just the black background and he was in the dark. And I was like, that would be cool. And I couldn't decide if I wanted to do a Mork and Mindy one or a Planet of the Apes, or kind of play off of that. So I mixed them both. So that was kind of a weird idea. And I think we were on somebody's channel on a stream, just kind of chatting. And I made the comment, I think I want to do Mork and Mindy. And, that came to life there. But depending on the title, for instance, like this one back here, Geiger, right? It's about a nuclear fallout. And, I started to think, imagery that goes along with nuclear fallout. And I started thinking about the old graphics that would go on the side, that they would paint on the sides of World War II bombers, the pinup girls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I always thought that was a beautiful art style. So I started to take influence from that and wanted to do something similar to that. And it ended up turning into that. But yeah, depending on the characters in the book, the title, what the story is about, the influences can come from anywhere.
So, kind of talking about influence, how does your mood affect your artwork? Like, can you tell a difference? Like, say you've had a crappy day at work and you come home and you're pissed and you decide to sit down and start drawing. Does your mood affect the way that the art comes out on the paper?
Absolutely. The mood will definitely affect whether or not something turns out well. I feel that when I'm, in a bad mood, it might not come out exactly like, I'm not concentrating on what I'm actually doing. I'm in a bad mood, right? So that's, but it definitely influences what I'm going to draw too. So it could be something dark versus something light and humorous, like the Planet of the Apes and Mork and Mindy, right? If I was in a bad mood, I wouldn't sit there and thinking, okay, we're going to do Mork and Mindy, or we're going to do something happy and playful. So absolutely, the mood is definitely going to influence. Um, it also depends on, what I am sitting down to draw, because if let's say I'm in a great mood and I pick up a Venom cover, that might not be the right mindset to do something dark and evil like Venom, right? So the mood will definitely influence what I am going to work on, what I'm going to create, and you know whether or not I should even work on something at the time.
Right. No, no, I always kind of wondered that too. It's like how much your overall, just how you feel at the moment. And I guess some people are mad. And they're like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and draw something nasty, and it maybe it turns into a masterpiece. I don't know, but I think that's an interesting side of people who are artistic, like how those things affect what you do. All right. So question 7, and I really want to ask about this. You got a chance recently to do your first comic book, and if I'm not mistaken, it was a variant cover. Is that correct?
Yep.
And was the book called Blasting and Styling? Is that what it was called?
So the name of the book was actually Delta Dogs.
Delta Dogs.
But it was a variant done for Blastin' and Stashin', the YouTube channel,
Blasting and Stashin'. Okay.
and Pocan Joe. So Joe came to me one day. He said he had an idea and just gave me a very broad idea for what he wanted to do on this variant, because he's a huge supporter of the writer of this book. And he threw out the idea. I said, yeah, that sounds great. I'm happy to do it. And so I put something together, just some basic rough sketches. And he loved it. So yeah, that worked out really well. And he was easy to work with. So when you have creative freedom like that, it makes the project even that much more fun.
So, like, did you get like an advanced copy of the book itself, and were you able to read it and then base your cover around that? Or did you have no clue? You said, all right, here's the basic premise, and then you drew something.
No, Joe sent me some back issues of the book. I wanted to become familiar with the story, but not only that, I wanted to be familiar with the characters in the book. I didn't want to pull away from their likeness. I wanted you to see what I drew and say, okay, that's this character, that's this character. The original interior artist, who actually does a lot of their covers now, he uses a particular color palette as well. A lot of vivid colors, but a lot of dark colors as well. So the purples, the reds, the greens, and different tones of blacks and shades of gray. And I wanted to keep that as well. I wanted you to see this cover and recognize, okay, that is a Delta Dogs cover. Those are the Delta Dogs characters. I didn't want to do something crazy. And it's like, wow, I see that cover. And then you open up the book and you're like, well, what the hell does this have to do with anything that's on the cover? So I definitely, I did my homework. I wanted to make sure that I understood, the storyline and where it was coming from, so that my cover would relate to that.
Oh, it's the sickness. I mean, it is. It's a beautiful, beautiful cover. And I'll actually put it up here on the screen while we're doing this so that people can see what I'm talking about. And I'll do the same thing with that Primordial cover, because both those covers are sick. But that one, I have to, as soon as Austin posted on his Instagram that, hey, here it is, I was like, dude, I have to have this. That is unbelievable. It was so cool. And I think was it at the Baltimore Comic-Con that you could kind of get your first crack at it?
Yep. Yeah. So I guess last weekend now, that was the only place that you can get it. I'm not entirely sure if the creator is going to throw it up on millennialcomics.com or not. So, more details to come on how to get a copy.
Cool. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll link down in the description, the Millennial Comics and all that, so we can all kind of keep an eye out for that, because I have to have one. So no, and it was well done to you, man. And I guess that was, the first time you get to do that, right? Did you have a sense of fulfillment? You're like, wow, okay, cool. I just did a comic book cover.
No.
Really?
Actually, in regards to the sense of fulfillment, so I just got my copies today. I saw it for the first time today. And that was my fulfillment, because I saw the final, I finished the artwork. It's been in Joe's hands for a while. it has to go to the printers. The comic creator has to okay everything. So I know that the artwork was done and in their hands. So there was this period of a couple of weeks where it was like, is he going to like it? Is everybody else going to like it? And if I did everything digitally, and I have a digital background already with like print and design and things like that, but I'm still thinking in the back of my mind, what if I shaded this too dark and when it gets printed, that doesn't look the way I wanted it to look? Or is this going to be okay? Is this blurred too much or not enough? So there was I was kind of on pins and needles the whole time. And then a week or so ago, Joe sent me just a picture of it in print. And I was like, okay, now it's real, And so I started to settle down a little bit in my mind. But now when I got it today and I opened up the box, and I'm going to yell at Joe for this later, but he packaged it really well. So it took me forever to get through everything. And I just wanted it in my hands. Don't mess my time up with paint, tape and stuff like that. But so I held it in my hands and I was like, okay, it was a done deal. And I'm really proud of it. And I hope everybody likes it. And I can't wait to do my next one.
That's awesome, man. I love it. All right. And so that leads me into question 9. And, question 8. What is your ultimate goal? Do you have you thought about I'm pretty good at this. Maybe I would have a chance to draw for an indie label or the big 2. Have you thought that far ahead? Is there, because I'm a goal-oriented person, right? So I think everybody, I preach to my kids, they could tell you all about setting these goals for yourself and then trying to obtain them. Some are long-term goals. Some are shorter-term goals that are attainable quickly. You've got your first comic book cover out of the way. What is the next goal for you? And then what would you like to see happen long-term?
So my goal is a little bit in reverse. I'm not driving towards anything. I enjoy doing what I'm doing. I enjoyed doing this because I knew who I was working with. I knew that it was, supporting a great book. My goal is this. I don't want this to become work. I draw because I love to draw. And if that turns into something and somebody wants to use it for a cover, awesome. I'm more than happy to do something like that. But if it becomes, something that interferes with, my business, or I'm not having fun with it anymore, I don't want to do that. So attaching ridiculous deadlines, editing, I like doing the art because this is what I wanted to draw. This is what I wanted to design. I don't want to just be, a tool for somebody else's idea, now I've got work to do and I'm not enjoying it. I just know that I have to get this done. So that's my goal. Draw what I love to draw. And if I can do something to support the community with it, awesome. If I can, utilize it and get it onto a cover or a print or something like that, a t-shirt design or, hats or stickers or something like that, that's what I want to do.
Love that answer. Love everything about that answer, man. I really do, because it's just like doing this YouTube thing, right? I've never considered myself a creative person before, but this is a form of, creativity and coming up with these videos, doing the editing and learning. And this has yet to become work. And I don't want it to ever be that. I really kind of push myself. I wanted to get 1,000 subs, right? Because I'm goal oriented. I can't help it. That's just who I am. And I set these different benchmarks for myself. Now that I reached 1,000 subs, I'll set another goal for myself. But if this ever becomes like work to me, like my day-to-day life is and a job, I will stop. And I'll do 10 questions. I'll do 10 questions the rest of my life because I love it. I love meeting members of the community. But yeah, no, I love everything about that answer, and I'll leave that at that because I talk too much as it is. But I think I just loved everything about that answer. All right, so question 9 and 10 are kind of some softball questions, but kind of get to know you a little better questions. And we're talking about your art a lot. Do you have some favorite pieces that you've done? Like one of my favorite Austin Lemme pieces is the logo that you drew for Nick's Kicks and Comics. That is the sickest thing. I mean, like it is so good.
Yeah, see,
But
that one was fun to do too, because I just started drawing it, and it wasn't like, hey, you know what, I'm going to draw this for Nick. I love Nick, but he had nothing to do with that drawing.
yeah,
It was his logo was up. We were on a stream. I started doodling, and I just started to I was doodling wings is what happened. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to do my own version of Nick's logo. And then I ended up drawing it. So he had no idea that I was doing it. I had no idea that I was going to do it. And it was funny too, because I had mailed it off to him and I didn't tell him. But I've already shared it with some guys in the community. We're talking all day, every day on Instagram. And I showed it to a couple of guys, and I wasn't going to do anything with it, right? It was just a piece of artwork that I drew on the back of a comic book board. So I sent it to him. And oddly enough, he sent me a message and he's like, hey, I was wondering if you would work on something for me. I want to do something with my logo. And I just replied with, ellipsis, 3 dots. And then I just left him hanging. Didn't even reply to him. So he was just sitting there like I was ignoring him. And then, a couple days later, he got it in the mail and he was pretty excited about it. So
God, it was so sick.
I didn't actually answer your question at all. But
well, no, it's okay, because that because I really kind of I forced you into that, because that was. I mean, I've seen a lot of your stuff, and I follow you on IG, and I've looked at a lot of the stuff that at least you post anyway. But I thought that was so sick. I was like, my God, that is unbelievable. So back to the original question: do you have some favorite pieces of your own, that just things that you've done that you're like, man, I really like that?
Right now, my favorite piece is the comic book cover. But typically, no. Once I'm done, it's my head just fills up with an idea. And then once I get it on paper and that piece is complete, that empties my head of that idea and I move on to the next thing, that it's just done. I think my favorite pieces though are probably something like, the ones I did for Nick. I did one for like Whack Comics, things that I get out into the community, right? Like, for instance, the one that we did for Comics Curing Cancer. We were on the 24-hour stream, and I drew that live on camera over that 24-hour period. And that I was able to do that, have a great time on the stream, chatting with everybody in the community. And then at the end of the day, that piece generated money going to a great charity, a great cause. That's my favorite piece,
Awesome.
So anything that I can do like that, hey, I want to just do a little sketch for somebody and they love it, right? That they got that little piece, no matter what that was. That's my favorite piece.
Love it. Love that answer. All right. Question 10. Do you like music?
Love music.
What kind of bands are you into?
Oh man, I love everything except for country. Even pop, going back to 80s, even the 60s and the 50s. Folk music, rap, hip hop, rock, metal. Yeah, I listen to everything. And, it's kind of jumping back to that question of mood, depending on what mood I'm in.
Sure.
That's what I'm listening to. If I need something influential, I'll do something, with hip hop or something like that. So I listened to a lot of hip hop when I was doing this cover, right? It's very urban and street themed. But when I'm trying to do something like my day-to-day work, right? I write a lot of code. I like mellow music that I can just ignore.
Right. It's just
but
noise.
If that music isn't there, I can't think, and I don't know what's going on in my own head, right? But yeah, I love music.
Who would you say your favorite band is? Like, if you had to say, like some of your go-to, like mine's Metallica. So, like, who's your go-to band or artist?
Ooh, my go-to band. This is going to be sound a little cliche, but maybe the Beatles,
I think that's a great answer.
Pearl Jam. I got into a lot of the grunge rock late in the game. So I'm still enjoying, Nirvana and things like that. Listening to all of their old stuff. It's still kind of new to me. Beastie Boys, definitely.
Oh yeah, I love the Beasties.
One of the first cassettes that I ever bought myself was Beastie Boys' License to Ill. So I
That's
always go
awesome.
back to that. A lot of, small indie groups. Like I listen to a lot of Sparta, if you've ever heard of
I know
them.
Sparta. Yeah, that's
Uh,
cool.
yeah, so I love them.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, cool, man. No, I'm kind of like that too. I like all kinds of different. I even like some country. I'm not a big like a. I don't like today's country. I like Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard and those guys like the kind of the old when it was country music. The other thing too, though, is growing up here, all my uncles, my great uncles, not my uncle, my great uncles, my grandmother's brothers, all played banjos. And like we would get together under my grandmother's porch, or she had a carport, and we would get out there in the summer. They would come in, and then they would bring their banjos, and they would sit out there and pick. That was like the greatest thing in the world to me. And still to this day, there's nothing I like better than sitting around with a bunch of people and somebody playing a guitar and everybody singing. Like I think that's just the funnest thing in the world to do.
Yeah, and all the banjo puts out a great sound, and it takes a lot of talent to play the banjo well.
Yeah, I had one uncle that did the banjo, but he also played a mandolin, which I thought was even harder because it was small, and it's just the whole. It was just amazing that they could do that. And I am not musical in the least. I like it, but as far as I'm more analytical, like that's my hand. I don't know. I just can't do it. So, but I used to love it. It was one of my favorite things. I used to love it when they would come in because one lived in Delaware, one lived in Ohio, one lived in Arizona, and they would all come in every year and meet at my grandmother's house, and they played music. So I loved it. All right, last thing, and kind of along with question 10, and then I got a follow up that I have to ask, and I've saved it to the end on purpose. Like, what about movies? Are you into movies in general? Do you have a lot of time to sit down and watch movies? Is it comic book movies, or do you stay away from those and just like other types?
I do enjoy movies. Typically, it's like horrible horror movies. I just can't get enough of them. Sci-fi movies, you know, like Dune just came out, loved it. So anything sci-fi. Obviously, you see all of the Star Wars stuff behind me. Big Star Wars guy. Um, yeah, but I definitely enjoy movies and TV shows, and whenever I can, and in my downtime, if I'm not drawing or doing something like that, it's definitely watching movies and TV shows for sure. In regards to like the comic book movies, I enjoy them, but I don't really chase them down. Like I don't mind. I don't need to see the whole MCU movie series and things like that. I've skipped a couple of the movies. I don't need. I just want to enjoy what I want to enjoy. I don't want to have to, be obligated to watch this because it's a little detail in this movie. But yeah, I definitely enjoy movies for sure.
Cool, man. All right, so we're going to do this Spinal Tap style, and we're going to go to 11
Okay, let's do it.
because I wanted to ask this question earlier, but I don't want to incriminate you for behavior in your youth. When you did graffiti art, did you ever paint on a building? Did you paint on a bridge? Did you do anything like that you weren't hired to do?
That I wasn't hired to do.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Very little with a spray can though. Um, a lot with like paint markers. It would be these big fat markers. So a lot of that kind of stuff with tagging. I've never done like a whole wall or a mural or anything like that. No. So everything was pretty much, notebooks, my school books, textbooks, my desk at school, walls in the bathroom, that kind of thing. But I wasn't out, painting the sides of trains or anything like that.
That's all. Well, all I could think about when you were talking about graffiti, because where my wife's dad, my father-in-law, where he lives right beside a train track,
Mhm.
and these cars come by all the time, and they have this amazing art on the side of them. Like, I swear, I love, like, every time I would hear a train, if I'm over there, I go out and sit on the porch so I can see the art that comes by. I know it maybe sounds crazy, but there's just really cool stuff on the side of these trains as they're passing through town. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's an awesome thing, and that's really what got me into it. Because I grew up in New York, in Long Island, and there's trains and stuff out there, and seeing all of that stuff, and of course the sides of buildings, and there was no internet back then, so that was my only way or means of seeing art. I wasn't going to museums or anything like that, right? So it was just seeing that in the streets and enjoying it. Fell in love with it. So yeah, it's definitely a great way to see that type of artwork is on trains as they pass by.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Austin, man, I have to say, I mean, I think I say it every week that, every one of these that I do is one of my favorite ones. But this has truly been one of my favorite ones. And I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, because like I said, I watch you on the streams and stuff, and we never, I don't have time. I just can't get on the streams like everybody else does. I want to, my life just doesn't allow that. But I've had a blast, dude, sitting here talking to you. You are insanely interesting. You have one of the things, and you said it, and that's why I love the answer to question 8 so much, was because that is you. You're community driven, and your art brings a lot to this community that we're in, and that seems to grow every day with new people. And I just really appreciate you, man. And I appreciate you coming on and sitting down with me here on 10 Questions. I truly do. It's been an honor.
Yeah, thank you, man. I was excited to get your invite. I was excited to join today. So thank you for having me.
Good deal, brother. All right. I'll link Austin's Instagram. Go follow the man. I mean, you're going to see all kinds of cool stuff. He posts a lot of his art that he does on there. I will also post a link to the variant Delta Dog that he just did, so that maybe we know when, if we get a chance, that one comes out, you can go pick that up as well. Um, yeah, what a great interview. I enjoyed every second of this. I hope you guys did too. And as we always end these things, remember the code over at Street Level Hero LA STC10, where you get 10% off your order. But most importantly, 25% of your overall order is donated to the American Cancer Society for Cancer Research. Make sure you go over there, check those guys out. Thanks to JPG for hooking us up with that discount code. Thank you to Austin Lemme for being on 10 Questions.